In this session, we'll talk about theoretical framework and variables. Now, before going into the detail of theoretical framework and variables, we should discuss what is a theory. Now, a theory is a formal, testable explanation of some events that includes explanation of how things relate to one another. Theories are simply generalizations that help us better understand reality. If a theory does not hold true in practice, then the theory holds no value. What theory helps us in is that it helps us in understanding or to gain an understanding of the relationship among various phenomena. In this case, or in case of management research or business research, it will help us understand how different variables are related with each other, or how different variables may show a certain relationship. That is, it will help us in prediction. So a theory enables us to predict the behavior or characteristics of one phenomena from the knowledge of another phenomenon. So we use theory in our research to develop an understanding as to how variables are interrelated with each other, and then predict that how one variable may influence another variable. So this is the role of the theory in business and management research. Now, what's the need of a theoretical framework in a study? Why do we need a theoretical framework in a research study? A theoretical framework represents your beliefs on how certain phenomena, and in this case the phenomena refers to variables or concepts, are related to each other. That is, how they shape up a particular model. We have already discussed about models and how do we come up with a model using gaps in existing research, and an explanation of why you believe that these variables are associated with each other. So this is your theory. So in research, a theory is your belief as to why do you think that variables are related with each other. But it is important to know that it is not just your belief. You have to back your belief with support from existing research, support from existing theories. Both the model and the theory flow logically from the documentation of previous research. So you have to read, you have to study, you have to evaluate, you have to assess the previous research or the previously available research in the problem area. For instance, if you are looking to study the impact of servant leadership on life satisfaction, now it's not just that you mention in your literature that I believe that if a leader is servant oriented, if a leader is humble, if a leader is focused on relationship building, if a leader is one that takes care of his or her followers, then the followers are going to be happy and they are going to be satisfied with their life. Mere assertions are not good enough. What you have to do is you have to identify and find support for your beliefs, for your assertions. How do you do that? You go to existing research. You find existing theories. Integrating your logical beliefs with published research, taking into consideration the boundaries and constraints governing this situation, is pivotal in developing a scientific basis for investigating the research problem. So you have to complement your own beliefs with scientific evidence, with existing research, with existing theories, by using references from existing theories, by using references from existing literature. Now we'll look into different research papers and see how we do it. So we'll look into the examples in due course of time while we are going through this concept of or the need of theoretical framework. The process of building a theoretical framework includes three things. If you are building a theoretical framework, it includes three things. The first is introduction of the concept. And how do you do this? You introduce the definitions of the concepts or variables in the model. So you introduce the variables of your study by introducing their definition. What are those concepts? What is the meaning of those concepts? Second part of theoretical framework is developing a conceptual model that provides a descriptive representation of your theory. So you provide a conceptual model that is focused on describing your theory. So what relationship do you expect? And why? And the third thing is coming up with a theory that provides an explanation for relationship between the variables in your model. Why these relationships exist? What is your theoretical foundation for these relationships? We'll be looking at each one of them in detail. So from the theoretical framework, then testable hypotheses can be developed. So once you know that these are the variables in the study, this is how they are defined. This is how they could be related. And this is the reason that you think that they are related. The next step is provide testable hypothesis. The educated guess as to how one variable might be related to the other variable. And these hypothesized relationships can thereafter be tested through statistical analysis. Hence, your entire deductive research or the research project rests on the basis of your theoretical framework. So all your hypotheses that you are going to draw or that you draw should have a solid theoretical framework. Failure to have a solid theoretical framework will actually mean a very weak research. Even if the testable hypotheses are not necessarily generated, developing a good theoretical framework is central to examining the problem under investigation. You might not propose any hypothesis, but based on your theoretical framework, obviously the relationship would be clear, that these are the relationships that you want to investigate. Since a theoretical framework involves the identification of the network of relationship, how one variable is related to another variable. And if there are more than one variable, what's the interrelationship between these variables? Now, it is very essential that before we go on to develop or identify the theoretical framework in detail, we understand what a variable means and what are different types of variables. Now, a variable is anything that can take on differing or varying values. So a variable could be anything that can take on differing or varying values. The values can differ at various times for the same object or person, or at the same time for different objects or person. For instance, example of variables include production units, absenteeism, motivation, culture is variable. You might find different culture within a particular country. Job satisfaction is a variable. The amount of social responsibility shown by different organizations is a variable. So these are variables. Anything that changes from time to time, person to person, or place to place. Now there are four main types of variables that we are going to discuss. The dependent variable, also known as the criterion variable. The independent variable, also known as the predictor variable. The moderating variable and the mediating variable. Mediating is also referred as intervening variable. Now your variables can be discrete, male, female, employee working in a public sector or private sector, employee in middle management or top management. So all these clear discrete values. Or continuous, the age of the individual. Or if we take average of job satisfaction, that becomes a continuous variable as well. Now, moving on, and we discuss the first type of variable, the dependent variable. So the dependent variable is the variable of primary interest to the researcher. He wants to know what's causing these changes in this particular variable. For instance, we might be interested in studying organizational performance. So we might want to ask, okay, why why there are changes in organizational performance? What is influencing organizational performance? The researcher goal is to understand and describe the dependent variable and to explain its variability and to predict it. What's causing these changes? Why is this variable changing? Why is organizational performance increasing or decreasing? Why is team performance increasing or decreasing? And how we can predict what influences or what impacts these variables. In other words, it is the main variable that lends itself for investigation as a viable factor. Through the analysis of the dependent variable, that is finding what variables influence it, it is possible to find answers to solution or problems. Find answers to or solutions to the problem. Now, for the purpose, the researcher will be interested in quantifying and measuring the dependent variable, as well as other variables that influence this variable. Now, what you actually do is, in order to develop your understanding, in order to reach conclusive findings, what you do is you quantify your dependent variable. Instead of asking this question, what influences the job satisfaction of people, you ask, rather than what, you ask the level of job satisfaction of people. So, and obviously, when we are studying the dependent variable, we are also interested in identifying whether a particular dependent variable has different facets or different characteristics or different dimensions. And then we quantify each of those dimensions in order to develop a better understanding of the variable. Now, what's an independent variable? It is generally conjectured that an independent variable is one that influences the dependent variable in either a positive way or a negative way. That is, when the independent variable is present, the dependent variable is also present. And with each unit increase in the independent variable, there is an increase or decrease in the dependent variable. So a variable that influences a dependent variable is normally referred to as an independent variable. For instance, a leadership might influence the job satisfaction of the followers. So here job satisfaction is being influenced. It is influenced by another variable. So job satisfaction is dependent and the other variable, leadership, is independent because it is influencing the dependent variable. In other words, the variance in the dependent variable is accounted by the independent variable. To establish that a change in the independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable, all four of the following conditions should be met. Now, what are those conditions that should be met to establish that a change in independent variable actually causes a change in dependent variable? The first being the independent and the dependent variable should covary. Now, what does this covariance or covary means? In other words, a change in the dependent variable should be associated with the change in independent variable. You cannot say that one variable influences the other variable if the change in one variable is not associated in any way with the other variable. In this case, the change in dependent variable must be associated with the independent variable. The independent variable, which is the presumed causal factor, should precede the dependent variable. In other words, there must be a time sequence in which the two occur. The cause must occur before the effect. So if I change the independent variable, only then the dependent variable would change. No other factor should be a possible cause of the change in the dependent variable. And the researcher should control for the effects of other variables. If you want to say that, okay, this is independent, this is dependent, any other factor should not bring about any change in the dependent variable. It should only be because of the independent variable that you think will bring about the change. And the fourth, there should be a logical explanation, a theory. You need a theory that must explain why the independent variable affects the dependent variable. What's the reason? Now, here are a few examples, just two of them. Independent variable is new product success, and the dependent variable is stock market price. Now, a stock market price for a particular organization, or the stocks of a particular organization or corporation, will go up if it sees, or if its new product sees success. The managerial values of an organization will affect its power distance, or the power distance within the organization. That's one of the cultural dimensions by Hofstede. Now, apart from those two variables, there is a third form of variable, which is moderating variable. A moderating variable is one that modifies the existing relationship between the independent and dependent variable. That is, it holds a strong contingent effect on the association of independent variable and dependent variable, expressed as IV and DV respectively. Although the moderating variable MV is not influenced by IV, so IV is not influencing the moderating variable. But what IV does is it affects the strength and direction of the relationship between independent variable and dependent variable. Now, what does this mean? How does a moderating variable changes or influences the existing relationship or the proposed existing relationship? For instance, the theory suggests that dissatisfaction at work leads to turnover. Now, if you are dissatisfied at work, you should leave. The people, it's normal tendency. The theory states that, or the research, some research will say that if you are dissatisfied at work, you leave the job. This would lead to turnover. But this might not be true in case of developing countries like Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and even in some cases developing countries as well. Now, why is this not possible? Why does this not happen? The reason is, or the reason could be attributed to the lack of job opportunities. So this job opportunities is actually modifying the existing relationship between variables. Now, in this particular case, job satisfying is actually modifying the existing expected relationship between the dissatisfaction at work and turnover. So because it's natural that if somebody is dissatisfied at work, he or she would think of moving to some other job. So we would say that job opportunities is the moderating variable because it is changing the existing proposed relationship. So what is moderation? When moderation is present, the strength or even the direction of a relationship between two constructs depends on a third variable. Moderation describes a situation in which the relationship between two constructs is not constant but depends on the values of a third variable, referred to as a moderating variable. As was the case of the last example where job opportunities weakened the relationship, it actually changed the existing expected relationship. In other words, the nature of the relationship differs depending on the values of the third variable, which is the moderating variable. For instance, let's say we say that, okay, now servant leadership will help improve the life satisfaction of people. Okay, good enough. That's very sound relationship. The theory will support it. There is research to support it. Leader-member exchange theory is there to support this relationship. But this existing relationship might be changed because of a third variable. A third variable might weaken this relationship. For example, if there is higher task conflict, or there might be role stress, or the higher task complexity within the job. So this third or these other variables can modify this existing relationship, could weaken the existing relationship. And now servant leadership might not be as effective in leading to improved life satisfaction because of these three variables. So this is what are those variables? Task complexity, role stress, role ambiguity maybe. These are moderating variables because they are changing the impact of IV on DV. This is how we express moderating variable. So you have independent variable here, you've got your dependent variable here, and then you've got your moderating variable with arrow flowing in between the relationship of independent variable with dependent variable. The last form of relationship is mediating variable. So a mediator variable is the variable that causes mediation in the dependent and independent variable. In other words, it explains the relationship between the dependent variable and the independent variable. How does it explain the relationship between the dependent and the independent variable? The variable that explains the mechanism of impact of IV on DV is referred to as a mediator. How independent variable is influencing the dependent variable. When we say that the impact of IV on DV is not direct and it is through another variable or variables, the third variable is the dependent variable. Now, what do you mean by indirect effect? What do you mean by mechanism of impact? Now, this simply means that IV affects the MV, independent variable affects the mediating variable, and that leads to the dependent variable. What we are in simple terms saying is that IV does not affect DV directly. So the effect of independent variable on the dependent variable is not direct, but it is through another variable, which is your mediating variable. So what happens is the independent variable will affect the mediating variable, and then the mediating variable will affect the dependent variable. So this is how the effect of independent variable is translated onto the dependent variable. What is mediation? The form of interrelationship is referred to as mediation. This form that we have discussed, the impact of IV on MV and MV on DV. So mediation involves a set of causal hypotheses. An initial variable may influence an outcome variable through a mediating variable. Now, mediation is also referred to as a causal chain in which one variable affects the second variable, and that second variable in turn affects the third variable. A variable may be considered a mediator to the extent to which it carries the influence of a given independent variable to a given dependent variable. Generally speaking, mediation can be said to occur when? Now, when does mediation occur? When do you say that, okay, IV is affecting MV and then MV is affecting a DV? So these are a few conditions that must be noted. The independent variable significantly affects the mediator, so it can carry the impact. The independent variable affects the dependent variable in the absence of the mediator. So when there is no mediator involved, there is a total effect. There is a significant total effect of independent variable on dependent variable. The mediator has a significant unique effect on the dependent variable. So the mediator must influence the dependent variable in order to have a clear path from IV to MV, MV to DV. And the effect of independent variable on dependent variable in presence of the mediator is shrinked. Now, when there is mediator in the model, the direct effect of IV on MV is shrinked because now the effect is passing through the mediating variable. Now, mediation occurs if the effect of independent variable on the dependent variable is partly or entirely transmitted by the mediator. The independent variable affects the mediator and then the mediator affects the dependent variable. Now the influence is passing from IV to MV and then from MV to DV. This is mediation. Now this is how you represent the mediation hypothesis. The independent variable and the dependent variable, there is no mediator. The total effect is C. The impact of IV on DV is represented by the value or the symbol C. Now the second diagram here we have got the mediating variable. This is your mediating variable. So what happens is your independent variable influences your mediating variable and then the mediating variable influences the dependent variable. But there might be certain amount of direct effect possible as well. Some effect might be transmitted through mediating variable and some direct effect might also be present. However, there is a chance that there is no direct effect present now in presence of the mediating variable. All the effect of independent variable on the dependent variable is now through the mediating variable. There is no direct effect of independent variable on dependent variable. Now, okay, we'll be discussing this theory in our second part of the lecture. So this is the concept of variable: an independent variable, dependent variable, moderating variable, and mediating variable. So dependent variable, our primary variable of interest, one that is affected, this here. An independent variable, one that influences the dependent variable. A moderating variable, one that changes the relationship, maybe strengthen or weaken the existing relationship. And lastly, a mediating variable, one that helps us understand how one variable is influencing the other variable. It helps us understand the mechanism of impact. So this was all about how different variables are related with each other.